Where it got really interesting was when I started to realize, well, hang on a minute. You haven't just got your life back. You've actually taken it further now than you had taken it before.
So a warm water welcome to all of you listening out there right now, listening live, and to anyone who listens to this recording in the future, welcome to you too. You might be a trek pilot, you might be a paddler, you might be an experienced adventure guide or a beginner, and maybe it's all new for you. And you might not have anything to do with paddling or water, but you're just curious, you're still in the right place. I'm Nicholas Jones, speaking from track headquarters in Airdrie, Alberta, Canada. And I just want to say we're really grateful that you've joined. And we want you to know we appreciate your listening and the time that you're offering to this conversation. You might want to consider that your listening brings the conversation forward, and we love that. So we may not know each other, but we're all connected by virtue of one thing: water. The water that we have in common that's been around for millions of years. It's the water that connects us, flows inside us, and around us. So as you join us, if you're coming onto the call right now, please type into the chat window and let us know where you are in the world and how has your experience of water changed your perception of life? How has your experience of water changed your perception of life? And we'll circle back and share some of your answers later. So you're listening to episode 3 of a new series on Track's Zoom Away Blue Fridays. We like to think of this new conversation as a gift. You likely felt the positive effects and benefits of being in, on, or around water, but we're going to look at it in a much deeper way. We're going to look at the inherent reasons why you feel good around water. In this series, Wellness Equal Water, we're going to take a journey with you to discover the connection between water and wellness within. We'll attempt to unpack the many dimensions of water and how it impacts human health and biology and the health of the planet. So join us and help us create a blueprint to navigate this journey, leading the way to uncover the source of human vitality and possibly redefine our understanding of a new biology and the life-charging qualities of water. My name is Nicholas Jones, and I'm your host for Wellness Equal Water. I've been working with Nolan and the track team for 13 years. I'm a corporate shaman, a truth seeker, a sense maker, and my mission is to bring the spirit back into work. I'm no expert, so that's why I'm constantly asking why, and I try to keep a beginner's mind. And to use water as an analogy of the way I look at it, I'm one drop in the ocean, but that really empowers me, knowing that the truth is the whole ocean, and that we're each as a drop, whole and complete, indivisible, each containing a piece of that truth. So I'd like to introduce the why of this whole conversation, since we're into episode 3, why it started in the first place. I'm going to turn it over to Nolan Veyard, track founder and managing director, to reset the stage before we jump in. Hey, Nolan.
Thanks, Nicholas. Welcome, everyone. And we're sure in for a real treat today. This is a brave conversation that you've all found yourselves kind of drawn into. And, the first thing that I think begs the question is why are we doing this series? Why did we decide to do the series, and why are we doing it, a series on wellness? And I think, wellness really is about, how to be well, how to stay well, and how to be vital. What really represents that thing we call vitality. For us as a sea kayak company, we've discovered that water has a lot to do with that, with what makes someone well. And much more than I think most people would perceive. And so, of course, we're made up of 70% water, and about 99% if you look at the molecular count, which is just crazy and incredible. And of course, we take it for granted. I think most people take what we're made up of and how it represents wellness for granted, and we want to really unpack that and really look at that and ask some challenging questions. And I think lately, the last 6 months here, we've all had something that's really kind of hit us. and we didn't see it coming. When I talk about that, I'm talking about the pandemic and our global response to it. And that's all had us kind of rethinking and thinking about our health and our well-being, and rethinking many things for that matter. And I think from what I've observed, nature has a way of doing that. I think it's kind of intuitive that, historically, even if you look back, nature has a way of really hitting us with something that maybe we don't expect. And I've actually been talking to some of the paddlers that we have in our community, and they've said, that maybe this is nature's way of speaking to us. It's telling us that, this isn't the way to treat our planet, and really not the way to treat ourselves as human beings. And I think that's an interesting observation, that maybe it is something at a higher level that's really helping us stop, right? And what it's done is it's really forced us to stop. And now we have this opportunity to get real, to get real about all of this. And it's an opportunity to, how I think of it, is to kind of clear all the clutter, right? All the polarizing discussions that we've all been privy to, the opinions, some of these long-held beliefs and paradigms, and really get down to, the way I think of it, get down to what's really at the core, what's real. Getting down to the essentials, what's the essentials of life and vitality. And so I was really excited because today's guest, Warren McDonald, he's no stranger to that process. And his story and kind of his life wisdom can really help us see differently and really act differently in the face of a shift. We all are finding ourselves in the middle of this shift. And our feelings and our sensations are one thing, right? Like how we feel about something and the sensations we have about something is one thing, but our perception, how we perceive, that's actually negotiable. We've got an opportunity to affect that. We've got some opportunity to take some power around how we perceive. And it's a deeper dive than perspective. Just having a perspective on something, our opinions, and based on our history and our experience, that's one thing. But the act of perceiving, how to perceive something, I think it's a deeper dive. And I'm excited to explore that with Warren here on the show today. And we were just so grateful to have him join us. We've gotten to know him quite well over the last couple of years. And I think, like I said, we're all in for a real treat today. And so, let's get real. Let's dive in with Warren and hear what he has to say. Let's really listen to what Warren has to say about this and how we perceive. So let's get it started, Nicholas. Let's
awesome.
Unpack
awesome,
this.
Nolan. Yeah. Set the stage. That's great. So we're going to keep it real for about 45 minutes now, and with our guest. And just so everybody knows, we'll have a 10 to 15 minute Q&A at the end. So, I see a lot of chats coming through, some really interesting comments and observations about your perception from water. So we didn't want these conversations to be too structured and controlled. So we're going to flow like a strong, mature river. That's what I shared with Warren. I said, we're going to be intentional, but we're going to meander a bit. And my job is to get us to the ocean. So we just ask you to flow with us. Our chat window is managed by Curtis. He's sitting behind me here, behind the pool. and he's going to monitor and check chat window, make sure all your comments come in or acknowledged. So to keep our sound quality as good as possible, we have muted everybody. So we'll unmute you when Q&A comes up, and we'll get things going. So I want to throw the first drop of water into the flow. I want to kick it off by, echoing what Nolan said. We got to acknowledge that we're about 70% water. The Earth is about the same too, 70% water. And we're going to be talking mostly about water here. So to date in this series, we've learned that water whispers to your mind with Jay Wallish and the Blue Mind, and it shifts your moods. We know that water even paints pictures when it freezes. That was our last episode. But did you know it also is the key to wellness on a personal and planetary level? So we say, know your water, know yourself. You were born in water. You cannot live without water. And if we move beyond just managing it as a resource, there is a boundless gift available. So let's jump into the deep end. If our first guest for episode 1, Wallace J. Nichols, was a water warrior scientist, and he introduced the blue mind, and our second episode's guest, Veda Austin, was a water whisperer, a water researcher, and a water artist, then you might want to think of Warren McDonald as pure inspiration, in water or any element for that matter. Warren is a world adventurer. He's hiked, climbed, swam, and raced under extreme conditions. He's a best-selling author, he's a public speaker and a motivator, and he's a visionary and a powerful catalyst for change. He has earned, uncovered, and truly owns the powerful tools which help us navigate crisis and change, tools that the world could really use at this time. He calls his company Warren McDonald Unlimited, Inc. I just love that. I say, yes, unlimited says it all in terms of what he offers other businesses. On behalf of the global track community, we're delighted and grateful to welcome Warren McDonald to join us now. Hey, Warren.
Thanks, Nicholas. I was going to say, have you unmuted me? It looks like you have.
Yeah, you're unlimited and unmuted, man. Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you. Great to join all you guys. It's awesome on a Friday afternoon.
Well, we asked our listeners to chime in, let us know where they were in the world. We've got people in Zurich, we've got people in the Kootenays, we've got people in Palos Park, Illinois, from Garrett in San Diego, Washington State, Calgary, Alberta, Bay Area, even Airdrie. And we asked them all, how has their experience of water changed their perception of life? So I'd like to give you the honor of answering that first, Warren.
I didn't realize you were going to ask me that question. I thought that was for everybody else. Interesting. So I'll start out. So I'm in Canmore, Alberta, in the Rockies here. I'm just seeing a notice pop up on here telling me my default mic's changed, but I think we're still good. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you loud and clear. Yeah.
Perfect. Canmore, Alberta, more mountains than water. The water tends to be nice and cold and frozen. How's water changed? I got a lot of stories. I got tons of stories related to how to my relationship with water, if you like. It's something I tend to gravitate towards, having grown up on the coast of Australia. Spent weekends on the Great Ocean Road, which I know many of you that if you've ventured down to Oz, you'd be pretty familiar with the Great Ocean Road. It's outstanding stretch of coast, home of Bell's Beach, made famous in Point Break. And so, just grew up mostly in saltwater, fishing with my dad. But it set me up in a few different ways. One is a way to travel on water was one aspect, but I think another way is it became a bit of a grounding tool for me, if you like. I think some of the times when I've really been at my best in life is times when I can just get up in the morning, eyes just barely open and straight into the water. I've got to say it's got to be one of the when I look back, those moments are always a highlight for me. So how's it changed my perception in life? I'm not sure if it changed it rather than kind of set a foundation for it. It's probably a better way to put it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm going to dive right into perception, Warren. When I first met you, and that was only a few days ago, and hearing stories from Nolan and being able to get to know you virtually through your voice on the internet and some of your talks, perception is a kind of a number one thing. But right out the gate, why is this principle of perception so important to you, Warren?
It's a great question. I think it's because it's when you strip everything down, it's the foundation is the way that I put it. When something needs to happen, there's really no way to kind of make it happen unless you can see it first, right? Anything that we create, we kind of hold the vision for it first before it exists in reality, whether it's a piece of music, some other piece of art, a painting or whatever, or it all kind of starts up here So over time, I suppose I've just kept peeling away the layers into how and why things happen, and I always come back to the same place. It's that it's literally how we see it, how we see an event, because that then in turn kind of helps us frame how we interpret it, and then from there we kind of move on to what kind of decision we make around it. And I think you're right, as Nolan kind of touched on in the beginning. I think this whole pandemic experience has allowed us to, like, a lot of the noise has kind of gone away, and it's allowed us to sit in some kind of stillness, maybe for the first time for a lot of people, and really question that whole idea around perception, around how we interpret the world, and how we see our lives, how we see ourselves on this ball of rock hurtling through space, as I like to put it. And although it's not mostly a ball of water, so I'll correct myself there. But yeah, so it's become hugely important. I think it always has been, but more so in the last couple of decades, for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, Warren, it's valuable at this time in history that you said that. And there's also a lot of fear out there right now, fear about something that is invisible,
Yeah.
So fear playing into it. But for you, how did you overcome your fear? I know that's a broad question, but that's what's going on in the world right now. How did you overcome your fear?
Yeah, interesting. In a lot of ways, I felt like that I'd been preparing for something like this my whole life. I would say Margot and I, we're not exactly preppers, but we kind of like to think of ourselves as ready. And I got to admit, this kind of took me by surprise. Like, I thought I was ready for a lot of things, but I wasn't ready for a pandemic. I thought I was. That's probably not even true. I hadn't actually thought a lot about a pandemic and what that would mean. And so it was an interesting process. In the beginning, I just thought, it's not a big deal. I'm kind of a natural quarantiner. Like, I'm pretty good at this. I kind of keep to myself for the most part anyway. And I didn't really notice a big difference until, I think there was a couple things happened. One was, I felt like I lost access to some of the activities that I used to kind of keep me going. And two, I think what I started to feel was, hey, dude, it might be okay that you kind of feel good about this, but I started to feel the kind of the energy set of the planet, right? In a lot of ways, this all-encompassing kind of fear. And yeah, it was pretty heavy duty, right? We kind of all went through it. I'm sure we all felt it to some degree, but it was a wild feeling to think that everybody on the planet was experiencing this thing all at once, and it affected me way more than I thought it was going to. I kind of hit the downward spiral there for a while, and it wasn't in the greatest place. And then eventually just kind of had to snap myself out of it and revert back to some of the tools that I've learned over the years, kind of breaking things down and getting right back to the root and asking that question, how are you seeing this? Are we gonna focus just on the downside of this, or are we gonna start looking for the some kind of jewel in here somewhere? And the jewels aren't easy to find, that's for sure. But for me, it was any piece that I could find to get some kind of forward momentum. But it's interesting. And as soon as I hear myself saying that, it's like that was one part of it, but another part of it was a huge acceptance of that forced stillness. So when I think about it now, it's a great question, because it was almost like a balancing act. There's, in a lot of ways, I like to keep a forward momentum, right? We all do. But in another sense, it was great just to be kind of stopped in my tracks. And it's like, dude, you're not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And you're just going to sit with this. And so then, it was time for a bunch of reading. It was time to pick up the guitar again. It was just basically making the best out of it.
So when you were down in that inquiry and you were really feeling it, the tangible, visceral fear that was going on in the world, and I think a lot of people felt that. I got to ask you, where does this fear come from, Warren? In your view, in your experience of life, where is it rooted and sourced?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for the most part, I think they're typically, I don't know if it's fair to say there always has to be an external factor, but there's definitely an external factor. Like you'd have to imagine that if there was a guy out there, and maybe there might be somebody on the call that might fit this bill. If there's a guy out there that was, out at sea for, 2 or 3 months or whatever, or out in the Kootenays, and I can joke about that because I lived in the Kootenays for a while. But that you had really cut yourself off, you'd wonder, it's a great question on whether that person would have picked up on that fear. It's a really interesting thing to think about because the external sources are big time. And, and in a lot of ways I should know better, but I fell into it the same as everybody else. Reading all the news that came out certainly didn't help. I think because for me personally, I got to a point where any conversation around the pandemic was, you know what, look, I don't know if you need to know any more about it. All you need to know is act like you've got it, act like everybody's got it. And that's really, if you just follow those 2 steps, you don't really need to know anything else. You just don't need to think about the whole politics around the mask and all the rest of it, right? If you thought you'd had it, you'd probably put on a mask, right? Why not do that anyway? So over time, I got to strip it down to its essence, but I got to admit, it took a while.
Yeah, I love that. You made it real. So you stuck with it till you found it. I also, though, you said the external environment, and a lot of people are in urban environments. They're close to each other, like a lot of the heavily populated parts of the world, including cities all over the world, and information that we're swimming in. But I see a lot of pictures of you on your website, and as a little time that I've gotten to know you, you're out in nature. And you said yourself that you were disappointed you couldn't get access to some of the activities that you could do. So what does nature provide for you, Warren?
Yeah, it's always been a point of connection is probably the one word that tends to pop up when I think about nature. Is a connection. And let me give you, I'll kind of paint that picture for you. So it goes back a ways for me. I mean, I grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne. I was basically just a guy that, lived for the weekend. I liked rebuilding cars. I liked to party probably harder than most. I mean, I grew up in Australia, for God's sake. And I was 17, maybe coming on 18. I was doing an apprenticeship. And as part of our apprenticeship, we were taking on this Outward Bound style course. It wasn't technically Outward Bound, but the guy modelled our week on Outward Bound. And so the idea was that we would go out and we would spend time in this hike in the Victorian Alps, they're called. But you can forget any visions of Swiss Alps or anything like that, right? We don't really have real mountains in Australia. But in this high country, and the idea was a hike from A to B. And I remember John, our instructor, said, hey, you make sure you're in good shape for this. And I thought, oh, yeah, fair enough. So I ran a few times, went for a run now and then. We get to our takeoff point and we camp the night. The next morning we get up and we start hiking. And I'm thinking, wow, this is a piece of cake, right? This is not a big deal at all. And next thing John says, right, I want you to turn right here, turn right at that signpost there. And the signpost is this sign that's pointing straight up, and it says staircase spur. And this is the Mount Bogong staircase. And it's basically a trail that just goes straight up for about 6K. And I'd kind of grown up car camping, so I'd spent a fair bit of time outdoors, but I hadn't really been in the mountains like that. And I'm pretty kind of embarrassed to even admit this, right? But I barely made it to the top. Just barely made it. And just got my ass handed to me on a plate. And the rest of the guys were young, fit, football players, kind of think hockey players here in Canada. And there was me and one other guy that barely made it, and the rest of the group just rode us for the next couple of days. And I just felt so beaten down and completely demoralized. Like, I'd beg John to let me go back to the bus, and he says, dude, there's no bus, right? The bus is gone. And so this was the first day one. And we get towards the end of the trip, and anybody familiar with Outward Bound, which I'm guessing a lot of people are, is we get to do this thing called the solo. And I had no idea we were going to do this, but John gets it together and he says, right, you're all going to head off in a different direction, and here's a bag of flour and an empty water bottle and a box of matches, and you go that way, you go that way, and I don't want to see you again till morning. And so we all head out. I head out, right? I find firewood. I find some water. I get a fire going, and I have to keep it going through the night because it's cold, right? It's not Canada cold, but it's cold enough. And at one point, I'm lying out there completely alone, and I'm looking up at the stars, and I had this feeling that the best way I can describe what it was like is it felt like I was being electrocuted, right? It felt like this full-blown, just spiritual experience where in an instant I felt so insignificant, so small, but part of something just massive. And it still gives me shivers when I think about it today. It was mind blowing, the feeling. And I've come over the years to call that feeling the connection, and spent the rest of my life chasing it. I mean, I still chase it to this day. And it was one that the second part of that story was I wander into camp the next morning, and there's a bunch of guys sitting around camp that had obviously been there for quite some time. And it turned out that a lot of these guys hadn't managed to get through the night. And it was like, aha, right, you guys have ridden me for the last 3 or 4 days. Now I got something on you. And it I kind of stood a little higher, and it just gave me something. It's like, this is something that I can do. And I think that really set the tone for that, what it feels like to be kind of self-sufficient and in the outdoors. And I went home and I started running, and a year or so later, I just about ran up the side of that mountain. It was a piece of cake, and that kind of got me into backpacking, and never really looked back. But it took that experience of I think two things. One, feeling part of this whole thing, which I hadn't really felt part of before. And two, that feeling that you can strip everything else away, and we can put ourselves at the mercy, or expose ourselves, as if you like, to the outdoors, and we can be okay. And it was an amazingly strengthening feeling.
Oh, I can feel it. Feel that connection. And you were in the elements, Warren. And I want to talk about the elements now, but just two of them. We have, archetypally in the earth, we have earth, which is, land and those experiences. We have air, flying, people who love to hang glide and skydive and all that. They have experience in air. We have fire, which is always interesting and might be better if it was metaphorical. And we have water, of course, but you've had a lot of adventures on land, I'm curious, between Kilimanjaro and Federation Peak and, climbing 600-foot, frozen weeping walls, which you've done. What did you learn about Earth as an element?
In terms of Earth as an element, and I mean, this applies to, I suppose it applies to all the elements, with the exception of fire, maybe. But the biggest thing I learned about Earth is that there's something about, I don't want to call it rare earth because that's kind of something else, but there's something about wild places in general. And I think I first experienced that on Earth rather than on water, for sure. Although it's interesting. I mean, my first sport that I was ever into was scuba diving. So it's kind of definitely into exploring water back then. But there's something about when something's kind of pristine and untouched. I mean, right, we kind of, you know, we've got the earth element, you know, we're kind of in a house. I'm in a house. There's roads and there's a city outside. Well, not so much a city, but there's a town outside. And sure, that's earth, but that's completely different than the earth experiences that I sought out. There's really something about being on a place in its own terms that was super attractive for me. I mean, I spent years as a forest activist down in Tasmania, and it was interesting. One of the big, the reason I got involved in that campaign was the Tasmanian government were trying to push this road through an area. It was probably really the last intact piece of temperate rainforest on the planet. Rivers without bridges, just completely wild place. And they wanted to put this tourist road in. And I'm like, do you know what? There's enough places that we can drive to. We've got to leave something for the person that's prepared to strike out on foot and experience a place on its own terms. And yeah, when I saw what was going on down there, it's like, no, this is I can't really just stand by for this. And so yeah, when it comes to Earth, it's definitely those kind of more remote places that I'm looking for if I'm going to experience that element.
I love that distinction, rare earth. It's like a distinction of being precious, you know, that it's wild and nourishing. So let's switch to water, because you said your first experience really as a sport was in water, scuba diving. So how has your connection to water evolved, and how do you define your connection to water now?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because it shifts and kind of moves, right? I think this probably for all of us, I'd say. But so I started off on water. I was never much of a surfer. I kind of didn't really do much for me, although I grew up on the Great Ocean Road on surf beaches. But so we would tend to boogie board and stuff. But I spent most of my time on that road. If you leave the surf beaches and you kind of tool around the rocky headlands, is where you find all the rock pools and that's where my brother and I would spend, you know, most of our time. And there was just something about it. There's something about, even to this day, if there's a rock pool and I've got a mask, and I'm hoping that I've got my shit together enough to have a mask if I'm anywhere near a rock pool, but there's something about just getting in there and seeing what's going on and exploring. It's never gone away. It kind of, and so for a while I kind of stuck more than to land. I went backpacking around the planet for 2.5 years, I suppose, in my mid-20s, and so I was more land-based there for a while. But speaking of rocks, I had a funny story. I was on a small island called Kauai, kind of north of Lamu on the North Kenyan coast when you're heading up towards Somalia there. If you keep going, you get to an island called Kauai, and I was on that island for about a week and headed over to the other side with my mask and just found all these amazing rock pools and rediscovered that thing that I just loved to do as a kid, is when you can find, it's like the, what's the word? The word's not coming to me, not the El Dorado, maybe it'll come to me, but it's like the most amazing thing you can find is where you can dive into one pool and then it joins with an adjoining pool and you can swim through and come out the other side. And I remember finding one of those, and after I swam through thinking, dude, you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. You're on this island in Africa and you're the only one here. I'm not sure that was the smartest thing that you've ever done, but it was pretty cool. But those kind of things, I don't think they don't ever leave you, right? And then I kind of gravitated to the mountains for a long time. And I suppose in the last 6 or 8 years, I've kind of started moving back towards water again and kind of mostly through scuba diving, but a bit of paddling as well. So I think it's kind of, well, to use the analogy, it's a little bit of an ebb and flow, right? To stay right there in the stream the whole time, I'm not sure is the greatest idea, although I'm sure somebody on the call will argue with that.
I love it. I love the marriage of earth element and water element. You just painted the picture of the rock pool. I mean, I can't think of something more profound. And coming out the other end, some people would call that a rebirth, right? I mean, like you're always testing the edge of experience, and you come back and share that with us, right? To shift our perception. But you mentioned paddling, so I can't resist this. We have some clips of you in a track kayak. I know you'll remember the trip. I know you've been in a track a few times. So I'd like to share that with everybody so they can see you on the water paddling in a kayak and just enjoy viscerally through that experience, you know, what it was like to be there. And there's no sound, so please narrate, Warren. Feel free to share a little bit here if everybody can see what's going on here.
Yeah, so now, God, now I got to try and remember, is it Ida? I'm trying to remember the pronunciation.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're down in the Baja. I'm basically trying to fulfill my lifelong dream of trying to get my roll down. And just, so for me, when I see this clip, this wasn't really just about paddling. This was about kind of my favorite thing to do, whether it's in a kayak or whatever it is, but to be on a multi-day trip, because it's all well and good to go and do something for the day, but to set out and then go and camp and go and camp and go and camp is just a completely different experience. So to kind of be presented with that opportunity to be on that trip down the Baja was awesome. Kind of got me to, you know, tweak kind of some of my camping skills that are kind of pertinent for me, if you like. It was a great chance to kind of learn a few new things and how to go about different challenges that came up. But yeah, great trip. And Peter Kuhn, who's on the call, had helped us fashion a piece of equipment that I got to test out on that trip. And
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what would you say that the kayak offered that was unique for your experience in and around water?
I think for me, I spend most of my time in water swimming. And so, and then the thing I love about that is everything's stripped away, right? All you need is a swimsuit, or, you know, I spend a lot of time in the Kootenays. It's certainly optional. You just don't really need much, right? You can just go. And scuba diving is not that, right? You're so reliant on the equipment, and every time you use it, you've got to wrap your head around the whole process of the craziness of what you're doing. Whereas swimming is completely stripped down, and kayaking is kind of somewhere in the middle, right? Where you have this piece of equipment, and it can take you and everything that you need wherever you need it to take you. And it just, I don't know, it's just an incredible experience. It's kind of a little bit different, but I know we talked about this the other day, but might be a good time to kind of share this story. But I was on a hike in the southwest of Tasmania quite a few years ago, and it's a pretty big deal. I can't remember how many Ks is, but typically it's a 14-day hike and pretty rugged terrain. Southwest Tassie is known for shutting a lot of people down. And so we're on this 14-day trip, and we had to do it in 10 because one of the girls there were three of us, and the girl that was with us was due in court on a particular date because of our activism, and it was kind of her turn to show up in court. And so we had to be back on a certain date. So we were really pushing it and big days. And I remember at one point, we about halfway through came up over this ridge, and we're dropping down the other side, and I looked off and this bay opened up, and there was a boat moored in this bay. And I just remember thinking, almost felt like they had cheated by sailing in there, because we had really busted our asses to get to that place. And it was this feeling of when you're on foot that you can be in these places, nobody else gets to be there. And then all of a sudden there's this boat. And for some reason, it hadn't even occurred to me that somebody could just simply sail in. And I remember looking at that and thinking, do you know what? When I get too old and I can't walk anymore, I'm just too messed up. That is the way to travel. I need to travel on the water. That makes a lot of sense that you can access these places, and so it is. It's that feeling of having a vessel, if you like, that can just get you to these a different kind of wild place than I was used to growing up, for sure.
Love that. So what's next in your exploration and your connection to water? Is there some experience in water you haven't had yet that you're looking to explore yet or next?
Yeah, there's probably two that come immediately to mind. I got to check off a pretty big one a few years ago, which was to raft the Franklin River in Tasmania. It's kind of wow. The Franklin was a big. The Franklin set the scene in a lot of ways for the whole. It created the Wilderness Society. Was kind of born out of Lake Pedder first, and then the fight to save this amazing river, the Franklin. And so it's been pretty high on my hit list for a long time. Pretty intimidated by it, the whole idea of it. I've had friends that have been on it in a flood, and the water just can come up incredibly quickly. And so I've been pretty intimidated. Got to do that 2 years ago. The next one is to spend a couple of weeks on a kayak in that Port Davey, Bathurst Harbour area that I first kind of saw that yacht all those years ago hiking through the southwest. So that's still on the list, is to kayak around the southwest. And then another one, I'm signed up right now. I won the lottery for a Grand Canyon float for March. And I'm kind of watching it with trepidation. It's like, is this going to go? I mean, so we'll see. Fingers crossed for that one.
Yeah, our fingers are crossed for that for sure, Warren. We'd love to see you there. You said something interesting. You said in somewhere you were interviewed, you said fish don't know they're in water in the same way we don't think about being in water. Tell us a little bit about that. That's a fantastic saying.
Yeah, do you know, that came to me a long time ago. I just got so sick of people talking about how we have to save the environment. And I just thought, what a ridiculous thing to say. It's absurd that we even need to say that we got to save our environment. I mean, what the hell are we thinking? It'd be like, and that's kind of where the analogy comes in, like a fish is just in the water. A fish wouldn't even imagine doing anything detrimental to to what sustains it in its whole environment. So it kind of drives me nuts in a way that it's even a thing. But
and there's that connection.
It is. It's that connection piece, and it's feeling part of something. And I think, because I didn't feel it until I was 18 or so. And I dare say, I know a lot of people that I'm not sure that they still kind of get it. Yeah, it's just so easy in this world that we've kind of built up around us to go through life without thinking too much about it. And I know I go through periods, I'm in the city, I'm doing whatever. I don't think too much about it either. But I think when we stop and just, even for, just a moment, think about how amazing it is. And we're just on this small ball that we wouldn't do everything in our power to make sure that it's okay.
Absolutely. Right? So we've danced in this conversation between earth and water and rock pools and, your adventures in water and kayaking. And now I'd like to share a bit of the story of your life. I know you shared a video with us, and I'd like to play it now for everybody watching. So we get a little bit more of your background, Warren, and understand some of your profound experiences in life. So I'm gonna play that. It has sound, as you know. It's about 3 minutes for everybody. So we'll watch that, and then we'll come back and we'll dive really deeper, Warren, into what that experience provided for you. So and thank you for letting us share that story. We are really excited to be able to bring this forward in a way that everybody can look. So
Hinchinbrook, a mountainous, uninhabited island off the Queensland coast of Australia. Covered in a dense tropical rainforest and fringed with spectacular beaches, it's a magnet for hardcore hikers like Australian environmentalist Warren McDonald.
We got the call late afternoon that there was a hiker trapped under a large boulder out on Hinchinbrook Island, and I was given to understand he'd been there for 2 days. So we went out in the helicopter and winched down on the wire cable with our equipment, and indeed found this fellow who was in trouble. We were on scene about 2.5 hours. Most of that time spent resuscitating him and getting the boulder off. He put forth a heroic effort to get himself out of there with our help.
I woke up in hospital to a whole new world. My life became about figuring out how to do everything again, and it felt like everywhere I turned there was a new obstacle trying to shut me down. At least, that's how it felt in the beginning.
I guess you don't go hiking anymore.
Oh, that's not entirely true.
It's extraordinary to be able to watch that, and but your story is critical at this point to take us back to Hinchinbrook Island 23 years ago. And again, the story, the role of water that played in that accident. You've talked about rock pools. You've talked about this passion of diving through and coming out the other end, and the edge of like that being dangerous. But that incident that you experienced, and facing fear. Why did it happen, do you think? Now you look back 23 years.
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's probably a few different ways that you can look at that. In one sense, you could say that it happened because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the water had kind of eroded that rock, right? What I didn't realize at the time is that crack that allowed me to go up and try and climb out of that creek bed went up and across. That piece of rock was kind of all eroded down behind and only really held on with a thin band at the bottom. So it was ready to go. All it took was me being on it. So that's one reason it happened. Yeah, wrong place, wrong time. You could look at it another way and say that I kind of needed that to happen to get to this point, which is kind of a bit of a mind-blowing thing to say. But I think we're all kind of presented with challenges, if you like, to kind of evolve and grow into where we need to be. And some are bigger than others. And I was obviously pretty stubborn, and I needed something pretty big to kind of shake me, out of where I was or onto a path or whatever. Like there's a whole bunch of different ways that you could look at it. But yeah, there are probably two different ways that you could look at that and kind of analyze, the why of that accident. There's a few different things there for sure. One of the things that, because we were hiking up a creek bed, right? You saw in the video there. So water was certainly played a big part. What you didn't really see in the video was, and I kind of don't talk about this part a lot because by the time you kind of tell the whole story, it takes up a fair bit of time. But one of the things that happened while I was trapped, when I was first trapped under that rock, and Git and I, the guy that I was with, kind of threw everything at that rock to try and get it off me, right? Branches of trees, whole trees, piling rocks up underneath it, and using another rock as a wedge. We just kind of threw everything at that. But a couple of hours into that process, and I can sit here and talk about it now, but I'm like in major pain, just off the charts. And a couple of hours in, I felt a couple of drops of rain, and then a couple more drops of rain, and then it got going. And we're in tropical North Queensland, and next thing you know, we've got this torrential downpour, and within probably an hour, what I had fallen backwards into that rock in my lap, which was a fairly dry creek bed, just a bit of a trickle running, really. I had just this raging kind of flooding creek, and eventually the water got up to around my waist, and at that point I tell you, water was not my friend at that point, because I could see the high water mark on the bank where it had gone before. It was over my head, and it was just terrifying. I don't think there's any other way to put it, because there was just nothing that we could do. And eventually the rain backed off, and the water level subsided, and I was kind of back to square one, which is a really bad place anyway to be pinned under that rock. But yeah, water was certainly didn't feel like a friend at that point, let me tell you.
So what an extraordinary irony, Warren. The picture you painted is that the water carved the handhold, had weakened the rock too. The dance between earth element and water element created an extraordinary circumstance for you. Yeah. And then when you were pinned by earth element, literally the land was on top of you and was immovable. And then to experience water now coming in and, caressing you. And I imagine that was frightening because of what you thought was going to happen. So, but then the ultimate irony, you wanted to avoid polluting the water source near where you're camping. So you went to take a leak, right, Warren? I mean, exactly. As an earth keeper, someone who cares about not polluting the environment, it's a profound story. I mean, I think there's a deeper why, but it's a gift to us all. I want to acknowledge that first of all.
Yeah, and in saying that too, one of the things that I'll kind of put out there is I eventually came to a place of acceptance, to the point where, if I had a chance to not go through that experience and to not be sitting here without legs, I eventually came to a place that I wouldn't go back, that I had gained so much more, that to go back and be the same guy walking around in two legs it made no sense. Which is, it's still, even hearing myself say it, it's a mind-blowing thought, but I honestly got there, and which kind of just really gives us a good sense, I think, of what we can adapt to as humans. In one sense we're remarkably fragile, but in another sense, we can handle and adapt to so much. Yeah. I still find it mind-blowing to this day.
Yeah,
but I got to touch in.
So go ahead, Warren. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, you're about to say the word. I've got to kind of touch in on one piece there, because one of the things while I was trapped, after we realised that I wasn't coming out and Geert would have to hike out, I just went through the longest night of my life. He packed up his things. We hugged goodbye. I watched this guy start hiking back down off this mountain. And I'd never felt so alone as that moment. And at one point during that wait, I remember thinking, okay, so here you are, you've gone out, you spent years seeking out these wilderness experiences. And then at one point, just the thought just kind of slammed into my head. It's like, is this connected enough for you? Right? Is this what you've been looking for? To die out here alone in this creek bed, pinned underneath this rock? And it was a pretty confronting thought, I have to say. It's like, really bitten off a big piece here. But and then all I did was, all I could do really was just to settle in, wait, hang in there as best as I could, try and kind of keep my head straight and eventually, yeah, the helicopter came in and you saw the guys winch down and got me out. But you know, I didn't really know the extent of the damage at that point, but I knew that it was touch and go. I might make it, I might not at that point. Even though I'd been rescued, I didn't know for sure that I was going to make it. And that pretty much stayed the case for the next 10 days, just in ER and intensive care. And eventually got to the point where I thought, you know what, I think I'm going to get through this. I think I'm going to make it. And it was really only then that I started thinking, you know, what does this mean? What kind of life can somebody possibly have with no legs? And, you know, at that point in time, I didn't know a single person with a quote unquote disability. So it really was like waking up into this whole new world where I really had to figure everything out again. And as I've kind of talked about in the past, I really kind of felt like this explorer. And this kind of ties into this perception piece, because it was really a choice. All right? I was in hospital with a bunch of other people, and a lot of them were really struggling with, they just couldn't wrap their head around how their life had changed, and they had this new limitation, whatever it was for them, whatever had put them in there. And I realized, and it was literally in a moment, it was actually while I was driving for the first time. I'd had my car set up with a hand control, and I was driving for the first time, and I'm cruising along, and I happened to look out the window at a car driving by, and the guy is looking across and looking at me, and I just thought, if that guy had any clue that I'm sitting here driving this car with no legs, he'd be freaked out, right? I'm freaked out, and I'm the guy driving. But I kind of looked down at the gap where my legs used to be, and I just thought, who gets to experience this, right? It's like there's all these things that I had to figure out how to do again. And it was literally like somebody reached into my head and flipped a switch, and I just decided in that moment, right, there's only one way to look at this. I'm going to look at this through the eyes of an explorer, and I'm actually going to get a kick out of figuring all these things out. And it's interesting, it's never really stopped. Even 20 odd years later, there's still things that will happen, and I'll be like, who knew?
Wow.
Didn't know that was possible. But it is, and that's why I say that this perception piece lays the very foundation, because it's literally at the root, and it's what set me up with the mindset to move forward in the beginning to get my life back. But where it got really interesting was when I started to realize, well, hang on a minute, you haven't just got your life back, you've actually taken it further now than you had taken it before, which was, and still that kind of, it blows me away just even thinking about that.
Well, we think that's in you, Warren, and while that experience might have been the genesis of perception, which is the gift you're offering us, there's another gift you offer us too, is resilience. You talked about resilience, right? Mm-hmm. And please share any story that then, you gave me an option of lots of stories. You've been trapped under a bomb or reef while snorkeling. You swam bathtub pier to pub. I mean, there's countless stories, but where did resilience play in in the stories from water?
Yeah, I think the resilience piece has always been there for me. I've always kind of been cursed, not to kind of put a negative spin on it, but I've always kind of had to go the hard way and do things the hard way and put myself in some kind of uncomfortable situation. And I didn't really realize it before, but that was another kind of thing that came to me while I was trapped, is that I realized at one point that I'd been preparing my whole life for those couple of days under that rock on Hinchinbrook. Everything I had done was preparation to get through this test right now, and pretty wild to think about, right? We don't always know to do the things that we do. But even to this day, like I'm a big kind of practitioner of resilience, if you like. Like I often have people say, "Hey, can you come in and speak to our team, and can you help us become more resilient?" And I said, "Look, I can talk about it, but I actually can't actually help you be more resilient because it's something that has to be practiced, right? It's like training your body, lifting weights. You can't talk about it; you have to do it." And so, for me, being in the water as a way to practice resilience in the beginning was what made most sense. So I'm still in hospital. They're teaching me how to use prosthetics. They're teaching me to use a wheelchair. But one of the best ways that I knew to keep in shape was to swim. And so that was really the most obvious thing for me to do. Not super easy by any means. First time I got in the pool, I took my younger brother Brett, to the Fitzroy pool, and I said, "Yeah, I need you to come with me because I got no idea what's going to happen here." And so we get there, and I'm sitting on the edge, and I throw myself in off the side, and I figured, you know what, I like to get the full experience, so I tried to swim down to the bottom, stay there as long as I could. Wasn't even thinking about my poor brother who's, standing on the side. He's wondering when he's going to need to rip the shirt off and dive in after me. But eventually kind of came up and had this amazing experience, kind of like being an astronaut, of feeling what it's like to be in a completely different body in the water. Was just another bit of a mind-bending experience because your legs really act as ballast, and I didn't know that. So all of a sudden I'm kind of top heavy. I felt like one of those punching clowns that with the sand at the bottom. And so kind of had to rebuild that relationship with water in a way, but then eventually started swimming laps and just kind of took it from there, and then swam that pier to pub, which is a quick little story, and we probably should share it. But so I realized one day that I'd swum a kilometre, and the little light bulb goes off, and figured, shit, if I can swim a kilometre, I reckon I could swim the pier to pub. And for those that don't know, the pier to pub is basically, I think it was one of the first ocean swims, maybe, but it's in the town of Lorne, west of Melbourne, maybe an hour and a half away, and pretty. It's open water. It's kind of the real deal. And as the name suggests, you get in the water at the pier, you swim 1.2K to the pub on the other side. And so I trained, and we get down there. I wheel down the boat ramp beside the pier. I get in. I'm sitting in waist deep water. I'm getting the goggles on. I got the swim cap on. Got to keep the hair under control. And then bang, the starter gun goes off. And there's like 700 of us, 732 of us, all take off at once. And if you've ever done an open water swim, like it's nuts. It's like being in a washing machine. It's just completely nuts. I got people swimming over the top of me, kicking me in the face, clawing my goggles off. Just mayhem for the first probably 5-7 minutes. And eventually we spread out. We just do what we're there to do, right? To swim as fast as we possibly can to that pub. And so I get to the other side, and like I said, it's the real deal. There's waves crashing, and I kind of get out from under these waves, and I hit the sand on the beach there in front of the pub, and I start scooting on my butt up the beach, and there's a rope to keep the crowd back. There's probably 60,000 people watch the end of this race. Big deal. And so everybody's behind this rope, and the finish line's there, right, and massive crowd. And immediately behind the rope are all these young kids that need to be at the front, right, so that they can see. So I'm scooting up the beach, and the looks on the faces of those young kids on that beach one day. All right, I'm pretty sure some of them never swum in the ocean since. I saw them, and I thought, you know what you need to do right now? You need to grab onto your legs and start rolling around in the sand and scream out, "Shark!" right, as loud as you can. It's a no-brainer. That's what needed to happen, but I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. My inner bad guy really let me down that day. And the thing was, I mean, they were so freaked out anyway, right? The kids, their eyes are like this. Guys just come out of the water just like that. It was kind of wild, and I still think of that today. I mean, even down, even when we were kayaking the Baja, right? It's like we'd on our crossing on the way back, we ran into another group of paddlers, and it just, I don't even think of it a lot of the times, but it just occurs to me every now and then. Oh, yeah, these guys got no idea. But on a trip down in Tassie one time, I paddled into a camp and popped out, and these guys that had just put their tent up there, just like, holy smokes! But yeah, I mean, swimming just became a great way to really kind of be in the world again, because you're kind of pretty beaten down. You go through. I mean, I can kind of underplay it now, but you go through that experience that I went through, and it kind of beats you down, right? It kind of it puts you into this box where you're just not a normal person anymore, and you're kind of lesser than. You're kind of quote unquote disabled, and so I went looking for anything that would kind of start me to kind of push that box back out, and water was the first place that gave me an avenue to do that.
Wow, Warren, you brought us right into the ocean with that story. It's just beautiful. You've connected vitality to water. I can feel the joy and the energy in you when you share the water stories. It's actually, we can feel it over here.
Cool.
So we are in the ocean. I'd like to give you one last chance to say a few things, because we've really gone. We could go for hours, Warren. I think you're a man of stories because you're a man of experience, and you've experienced a lot of things. But is there anything that you've...
There's a lot happen when you're getting through the world like this. Let me tell you.
I bet. But if we're down to the last drop in our conversation and the rivers come to the ocean, is there anything that you've never said before to the world that you would like to say now?
That's a good one. I think now is a really good time, and maybe the process has kind of started, I think, for a lot of us, with this opportunity that the pandemic has presented us with, to really stop and have a think. But because we're not through it yet, so if anybody that hasn't really thought deeply about this, the chance is still there. But for me, it's an opportunity to kind of to stop the bus, and to really have a think about, what we're doing here. We're like I said, we're on this rock. We're hurtling through space at God knows what speed. We don't know where we're going. And just to think about our time here and what we're going to do with it, and how we can kind of keep it as in as good shape as we can, because that's always probably been one of the biggest concerns for me, that I actually just heard somebody talk about this the other day, that forget about saving the planet. We actually don't really need to save the planet. The planet's going to be fine, but we won't be if we mess with it where it can't sustain us anymore, because what we do, I think over time it'll come back. I think the planet as an organism will sort itself out, but it would just be an incredibly short-sighted mistake for us is to try and change it too much without leaving it kind of the way we found it. And so that's kind of a passing thought, I think, for that I'd want to leave with people, is just to protect these wild places that we have, right? To keep our waterways, to keep them clean, to keep our forests intact. And now's the time to do that. We clearly in the past we were too hell-bent on just, this constant forward momentum and constant growth. But I think we got an opportunity now to question that.
Wow, Warren, thank you. For someone who had the experience of land, earth, and water threatening their life, to come and speak now as an earth keeper and a defender of the wild places, right? We appreciate that. We appreciate your generosity, the lessons that you've shared with the world. Don't stop, while we might have to stop now and take some questions and just check in with the community that's on the call. I want to thank you on behalf of the track community for all the work you've done. And it's been a joy and pleasure. And I know the entire track team appreciates that you're part of the community. So gratitude abounding in waves.
Thanks, Nicholas, and thanks, Noel, and thanks to everybody. It's it's a pretty cool thing to be.
Awesome. So we'd like to open it up for questions. Take a few minutes now. I know we went over time, but we always do because it is so rich. It is always so deep. So if there's anybody who wants to ask a question now, we had some amazing comments, Warren, through here, right? We've had some interesting observations and some people who were quite taken by surprise by learning an element of your story that was key to your life.